That quiet tightening that tells you this moment matters. Not later, not eventually, right now. Evelyn Collins stood near the entryway like a queen guarding her territory. Her smile appeared polished, practiced, and empty. Her eyes moved over me slowly, from my simple navy dress to my flat shoes, then to my small earrings. I watched her reach a conclusion before I had even said a word. She leaned toward her son Andrew, my fiancé, and whispered something she thought I could not hear. But I did hear it. She said I looked like the help. I kept my face calm. I even smiled. But inside, something clicked into place. This dinner was not about welcome. It was about judgment. My name is Lauren Hale. I am 33 years old. And I was standing in that mansion knowing I had already failed a test I never agreed to take. Andrew squeezed my hand just slightly, not in defense, not in reassurance. It felt more like a warning, like he wanted me to behave, to blend in, to not embarrass him. That was when I realized something else. This was not just about his family. This was about who Andrew became when he was with them. The house itself was cold despite its size. Everything was expensive and uncomfortable. Furniture chosen to impress, not to live on. Portraits of people smiling without warmth. Wealth everywhere, ease nowhere. Evelyn finally stepped forward and greeted me by name. Her tone was polite but distant. She did not ask about me. She did not welcome me. She simply acknowledged my presence. Rebecca Collins, Andrew's older sister, glanced at me once and looked away, dismissed. I stood there quietly, holding my purse, listening to the hum of quiet contempt. And in that moment I made a decision. I would not correct their assumptions. I would let them see exactly what they thought I was. Because sometimes the fastest way to learn the truth about people is to let them believe you do not matter. There was a reason I did not rush to explain myself that night. A reason I did not defend my job, my background, or my worth. I had learned a long time ago that people listen very differently once they think you have nothing to offer them. The truth is, I am not who the Collins family thought I was. I am a senior software architect at a global technology firm based on the West Coast. I design large-scale systems used by millions of people every day. I have been writing code since I was a teenager. I sold my first product in my early 20s. I earn more in a month than most people earn in a year. Andrew never knew any of this. When we met 14 months earlier, he asked what I did for work. I told him I worked in tech. That was true. He asked if I supported executives with scheduling and coordination. I smiled and said I supported my team. Also true. He filled in the rest on his own. I never corrected him. Not because I was hiding, but because I was listening. I learned this habit from my grandmother, the woman who raised me after my parents passed away. She lived quietly. No flashy clothes, no luxury cars. She shopped at ordinary stores and cooked simple meals. To the outside world, she looked like an average woman with an average life. When she died, I learned she had been a multimillionaire. She had built businesses, invested wisely, and then chosen simplicity. She once told me that money reveals people faster than poverty ever could. But pretending you do not have money reveals them even faster. In her final letter to me, she wrote one sentence I never forgot. People show you who they are when they believe you are beneath their notice. So when Andrew invited me to meet his family, and warned me that his mother cared deeply about appearances, I made a choice. I would arrive exactly as they expected. Quiet, modest, unimpressive. I would watch how they treated the woman they believed had nothing to give them. And whatever I learned that night would tell me everything I needed to know about my future. The Collins family did not speak loudly. They did not need to. Their power lived in glances, pauses, and what was left unsaid. Evelyn Collins ruled the room without raising her voice once. Every conversation bent around her presence. When she spoke, others listened. When she stopped, silence followed. She asked questions that sounded polite but were designed to measure usefulness, background, and connections. Rebecca Collins was different. She was sharper, louder in her confidence. She wore expensive clothes with the ease of someone who had never paid for them herself. Her laughter came too quickly and lasted too long, like she needed everyone to notice she was enjoying herself. Andrew sat beside me, but he felt far away. When his mother made small comments about upbringing and polish, he smiled nervously. When Rebecca asked where I shopped and laughed at my answer, he looked down at his plate. He never challenged them. He never interrupted. He never said my name in my defense. At first, I told myself he was uncomfortable. That meeting family can be hard. That maybe he would speak up later, when the moment passed. But the moment never passed. Instead, I began to see a version of Andrew I had not known existed. His posture changed. His voice softened. He became smaller, like a boy trying not to disappoint. This was not the man I dated. This was not the man who spoke confidently about the future when we were alone. This Andrew wanted approval more than honesty. The house reflected the same imbalance. Every room was perfectly arranged and strangely lifeless. No personal touches, no warmth, just wealth arranged for display. I realized something then. This family did not value connection. They valued control. And Andrew had grown up learning that love was conditional, earned through obedience, maintained through silence. As I sat there listening to them talk around me instead of to me, I understood the real test had already begun. It was not whether I could impress them. It was whether Andrew would ever choose me over them. The name came up halfway through dinner, dropped into the conversation with the precision of a blade. Rebecca leaned back in her chair and said it casually, as if she were mentioning the weather. She said Victoria Russo. Then she smiled and took a sip of her wine. Andrew stiffened. I noticed it immediately. The slight pause in his breathing. The way his shoulders pulled tight before he relaxed again. It was small, but it was there. Evelyn picked up the thread without missing a beat. She said Victoria had always been such a lovely girl. Accomplished. Elegant. From a family that understood how things worked. She spoke as if she were listing credentials, not describing a person. They said Victoria and Andrew had dated for 3 years. No one had ever mentioned that to me. Rebecca added that Victoria's family owned a luxury auto import company. She said it would have been such a perfect match. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away again. The message was clear. This is who belonged here. I glanced around the room and noticed the photographs for the first time. Framed moments of holidays and celebrations lined the wall behind Andrew. In several of them, a dark-haired woman stood close to him, her arm resting comfortably through his. Victoria. Evelyn followed my gaze and said nothing. She did not have to. The satisfaction was written across her face. Rebecca twisted the knife further. She said Victoria was still single, still waiting maybe. Almost like she knew something the rest of us did not. I smiled and said Victoria sounded impressive. That was not the reaction they expected. Rebecca blinked, thrown off balance for just a second. Andrew said nothing. Not then. Not when his past was laid out like a comparison chart. Not when I was being measured against someone else at my own dinner. That silence settled deep. In that moment, a question formed in my mind, one I could not ignore. If Victoria was the right choice, then what was I really doing here? After dinner, Evelyn announced that we would move into the sitting room for coffee. Rebecca excused herself to take a call. Andrew was pulled aside by his father. For the first time that evening, I was alone. I asked where the bathroom was and followed the long hallway toward the back of the house. The walls were lined with artwork chosen to impress, not to comfort. I was halfway down the hall when I heard voices. Evelyn's voice, sharp, controlled. Rebecca's voice answered her, lower but charged with irritation. I should have kept walking. I knew that. But something in Evelyn's tone made me stop. I stood still just beyond a partially closed door, my heart beating louder with every word. Evelyn said this situation had gone on long enough. She said Andrew was making a mistake. Rebecca agreed. She said this girl was supposed to be temporary, a phase, a distraction. They were talking about me. Rebecca said the timing was terrible. The Russo deal needed to move forward. Andrew needed to stay connected to Victoria if the family wanted the partnership to survive the next year. Evelyn said Andrew understood that. He had promised to keep his options open. Options. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. The house felt suddenly smaller, colder. Rebecca laughed and said Andrew had made one mistake. He had gotten attached. He actually seemed to like the girl. She called me a placeholder, someone to keep him occupied until the real plan was ready. Evelyn said they would fix it. They would announce the engagement publicly, then find a reason to end it later. Once Victoria was secured, they would invent a story if they had to. I stood there frozen as they discussed my future like a scheduling problem. Then Rebecca said something that erased any doubt I still had. She said at least the girl was too naive to suspect anything. Evelyn laughed. I stepped back silently, my hands shaking, not with sadness but with clarity. Everything made sense now. The silence, the comparisons, the pressure. This was not a family misunderstanding. This was strategy. And Andrew was not caught in the middle. He was part of the plan. When I returned to the sitting room, the atmosphere had changed. The furniture had been subtly rearranged. The lights were dimmer. Everyone was standing in just the right places. Andrew turned when he saw me. His smile was tight, nervous. He took my hands and said there was something he wanted to ask me. I already knew what was coming. He spoke about timing, about pressure, about how his family could be overwhelming, but how he knew what he wanted. His voice sounded practiced, like he had rehearsed this speech more than once. Then he lowered himself onto one knee. The ring was large, flashy, designed to impress from a distance. Up close I could see the imperfections. A cloudy stone, a setting that was slightly uneven. It matched the moment perfectly. Evelyn clasped her hands together as if she were watching a performance reach its climax. Rebecca smiled with thinly veiled satisfaction. Andrew asked me to marry him. I looked down at him and felt something settle inside me. Not love, not fear. Understanding. This was not a proposal, it was a maneuver. If I said no, I would be the problem. The ungrateful girl who embarrassed their son. If I said yes, they could control the timeline, control the narrative. I met Andrew's eyes. I searched for honesty. I found none. So I said yes. Applause filled the room. Evelyn smiled like she had won something. Andrew slipped the ring onto my finger and kissed my hand. No one noticed that my smile never reached my eyes. I had just accepted a proposal I never intended to keep. And they had just given me all the time I needed. The days after the proposal were strangely calm. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Engagement congratulations. Messages from Evelyn about planning. Rebecca sending links to venues she liked. I played my role carefully. But beneath that calm, I was working. This is what I do for a living. I analyze systems, I look for patterns. I find the weak points people assume no one will notice. I started with public records, corporate filings, debt disclosures, franchise agreements. It did not take long to see the cracks. The Collins family business had expanded too fast. Too much leverage, too little margin for error. Then I looked closer. Expense reports that did not align, transfers that repeated in odd increments, small enough to avoid attention, frequent enough to matter. Over time they added up. Rebecca. She had been siphoning money for years, not recklessly, carefully, just enough to fund her lifestyle while the company struggled to stay afloat. I documented everything. Then I reached out to someone my grandmother had once trusted, Thomas Reed, a quiet man with a long memory. Years earlier, the Collins family had pushed him out of a deal, legal, barely, ethical, not even close. When I told him what I had found, he was not surprised. He had his own files, his own records, his own reasons to care. We met quietly, compared notes, filled in gaps. That was when I learned the full truth. The partnership with the Russo family was not about growth. It was about survival. Without it, the Collins dealership network would collapse within a year. Andrew knew this. He knew his engagement to me was a holding pattern, a way to keep appearances while they negotiated his future. I felt anger then, sharp and focused, but it did not control me. Clarity did. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. And for the first time since I walked into that house, I understood the advantage I had. They still believed I was harmless. Once I started paying attention, the signs were impossible to miss. Andrew's phone never left his side. He took calls in other rooms. He smiled at messages he never explained. When I asked simple questions, his answers came too quickly, too smoothly. So one evening I stopped asking. I told him I was working late and parked a block away from the restaurant where he said he was meeting a client. I waited. 15 minutes later he walked in. He was not alone. Victoria Russo followed him inside. They chose a corner table. Close, familiar, he leaned toward her when he spoke. She laughed and touched his arm like she had done it 1,000 times before. At one point, he reached across the table and took her hand. I took photographs, quietly, carefully. Not for revenge, for memory. I needed to remember this version of him. The one who lied without hesitation. The one who balanced two futures and called it responsibility. Later that night, I gave him a chance. I asked if there was anything he wanted to tell me. Anything at all. His face tightened for just a moment before he smiled and said no. Victoria was just an old friend. That was when the last illusion fell away. Andrew was not confused, he was not trapped. He was choosing what benefited him most at any given moment. I added the photographs to my file and closed my laptop. The engagement was still on. But now the ending was no longer uncertain. The engagement party was scheduled 3 weeks later at the Collins estate. Evelyn treated it like a coronation. Invitations were sent to everyone who mattered: business partners, investors, industry friends, people whose opinions could protect or destroy a reputation. I watched it all from a careful distance. During those weeks I remained exactly who they expected me to be: grateful, quiet, agreeable. I nodded through Evelyn's instructions and smiled through Rebecca's condescension. Andrew played the devoted fiancé with convincing ease. But beneath the surface, everything was in motion. I coordinated quietly with Thomas. We confirmed who would attend, who needed to hear what, who already suspected something was wrong. Timing mattered, context mattered, truth needed the right room. The night before the party, I gave Andrew one final opportunity to be honest. We sat together going over last-minute details. I asked him how he felt about our future. He said he was excited. I asked if there was anything he wanted to tell me, anything he was holding back. He hesitated, then smiled. He said there was nothing. That answer settled everything. The next evening, I opened the other side of my closet, not the modest dresses I had worn to family dinners. The clothes I chose because I liked them, because they fit my life, because they reflected who I actually was. I dressed slowly, intentionally. This was not about shocking anyone. It was about accuracy. As I drove toward the estate, I felt calm, not nervous, not angry. Ready. The stage had been set exactly the way the Collins family wanted. They just did not realize who would be telling the story. The Collins estate looked different that night. White tents stretched across the lawn. Soft lights hung overhead. Music floated through the air. Everything was designed to feel celebratory and untouchable. I arrived in the same old car I always drove. The valet hesitated before taking my keys. I let him hesitate. Inside the main tent, conversations slowed as people noticed me, not because I demanded attention but because something did not match the story they had been told. Andrew found me quickly. His eyes moved over me with confusion. He asked where I had gotten my dress, my jewelry, why I looked so different. I told him I looked like myself. Before he could say more, Evelyn stepped onto the small stage near the center of the tent. She welcomed everyone. She spoke about family, about legacy, about exciting plans for the future. She hinted at growth and partnerships without naming them. Then she called Andrew up beside her. Finally, she said my name. Every head turned as I walked forward. The crowd was quiet now, curious, expectant. I stepped onto the stage and accepted the microphone from Evelyn's hand. I thanked her for the warm welcome she had given me since the beginning. The words landed heavier than they sounded. I told the room that when I first met the Collins family, I had made a choice. I chose to let them believe I was simple, unconnected, ordinary. I wanted to see how they treated someone they thought had nothing to offer. I described that first dinner, the comparisons, the assumptions, the way silence was used as judgment. Andrew's face drained of color. Then I told them about what I overheard in the hallway. The plan, the placeholder, the expectation that Andrew would return to Victoria Russo once the business arrangement was secure. Gasps moved through the tent. I held up my phone and showed the photograph. Andrew and Victoria, hands joined across a restaurant table, taken 2 weeks earlier. Andrew reached for me. I stepped back. I explained that I had spent the weeks since the proposal learning more about the Collins business, about the debt, the fragile franchise agreement, the desperation behind the smiles. I said there was more. Thomas Reed stepped forward and handed a folder to a representative from the manufacturer standing near the stage. Documents, records, proof. I looked at Rebecca and stated calmly that the missing funds in the company accounts were not a mystery. They had a name. Her name. The tent was silent. I removed the ring from my finger and placed it into Andrew's hand. I said I would not be marrying into a family that confused control with love and strategy with integrity. Then I set the microphone down, and I walked away. No one tried to stop me as I stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted instinctively, as if everyone understood that this moment was finished and could not be undone. Behind me, voices began to rise. Evelyn spoke sharply, trying to regain control, insisting there had been a misunderstanding. Rebecca's voice cracked as she denied everything, her confidence evaporating under the weight of too many watching eyes. Andrew stood frozen where I had left him. The ring was still in his hand. He called my name once, quietly, not to apologize, not to explain, just to see if I would turn back. I did not. As I walked past the edge of the tent, I caught glimpses of truth settling in. Business partners stepping away, guests checking their phones, conversations ending mid-sentence, the kind of silence that follows when appearances finally collapse. The night air felt cooler than it had moments before. Cleaner. I took a deep breath and felt the tension leave my shoulders for the first time in weeks. I was not angry anymore. I was finished. I reached my car and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Inside the estate, the Collins family was beginning a battle they could not win. I drove away without looking back. Some doors closed loudly. The important ones closed quietly. The fallout came quickly. Within days, the calls started, business partners distancing themselves, meetings postponed, invitations quietly withdrawn. The story moved faster than Evelyn could contain it. The manufacturer terminated the franchise agreement before the end of the month. Without it, the Collins dealerships could not operate. Investigations followed, financial audits, internal reviews that uncovered what had been hidden for years. Rebecca was removed from her position pending further inquiry. Her lifestyle vanished overnight. The confidence she once wore so easily did not survive scrutiny. Andrew sent messages, long ones, apologetic ones. He said he had been pressured. He said he had feelings for me. He asked if we could talk. I deleted them all. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. He had been given chances, quiet ones, honest ones. He chose silence and convenience every time. Evelyn never contacted me. Pride does not apologize when it loses. It writes history and pretends it was wronged. I returned to my life, my work, my routines, my quiet apartment. Nothing dramatic changed on the surface, and that was exactly what I wanted. The Collins family believed power meant control. They learned too late that power without integrity collapses under its own weight. A week later, I stood in my kitchen as the morning light filled the room, coffee warming my hands. City sounds drifting through the window, life steady and real. I thought about how close I had come to tying myself to a family that would have reduced me to a role, a tool, a means to an end. My grandmother used to say that peace is expensive, but it is always worth the cost. You pay for it with difficult choices and uncomfortable truths, and once you have it, you protect it. I did not expose the Collins family to humiliate them. I exposed them because truth deserves daylight. Because silence only protects the people who misuse it. I learned something important through all of this. Being underestimated is not a weakness, it is an advantage. When people believe you do not matter, they stop guarding their intentions. They reveal who they are. And when they do, you get to choose. You can shrink, you can fight loudly, or you can step back, gather your truth, and walk away clean. I chose clean. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever been judged by appearances or underestimated by people who never took the time to know you, you are not alone. Like the video if this spoke to you. Share it with someone who needs the reminder. And leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Sometimes